What's the connection between Dialogic and the internet? Well, monologic is quite curious because actually we don't think monologically. Actually, if you become aware of your own thought processes, you'll realize that they're always stimulated by other voices, other positions. They're always seeking to explain or persuade or to understand otherness. They're stretched out in relationship. So why do we understand thinking as monologic? This hasn't always been the case. I'm not saying you do, of course, but there has been quite a tradition of understanding thinking in terms of fixed algorithms and formal logic and mathematical type axiomatic systems, closed systems. How did this happen? It's been very influential, and it only really possible with writing, and particularly with print literacy, when large numbers of people were reading and writing. You notice a change in our understanding of thought from an utterance in a dialogue where even new ideas like Galileo's new ideas were presented in the form of dialogues. And then at a certain point, with Descartes for example, we get the idea of propositions in proofs. Reasoning is not about a dialogue, it's about presenting the one true representation of reality, so that truth becomes something that can be represented, can be found in a book, can be put on a library shelf, instead of being something that's a dynamic and living part of our experience. I think this is quite a major and interesting shift from more oral societies to a society to some extent dominated by print. And it's not just print, of course, it's an affordance of print. I'm not saying this is determined by the technology, but print in combination with formal schooling can produce a monologic account of meaning, knowledge, truth, and of course of education. So education becomes a matter of inducting people into the reading, writing and arithmetic kind of skills, and then transmitting knowledge through textbooks or through a canon of key books that you have to read. Knowledge becomes something that is therefore fixed in writing and is then transmitted and transmittable. Whereas in oral societies, understanding, meaning, truth, knowledge and so on are always understood in terms of relationship, in terms of dynamic dialogues with living voices. Even abstract principles are represented and personified as spirits or ancestors or gods. So when Socrates described himself as a philosopher, he literally meant a lover of the goddess Sophia. It was a dynamic relationship for him with erotic connotations, and that's brought out in some of the dialogues that were then transcribed by his student Plato. But it's interesting that only because they were written down could they come down to us over the millennia, and only because they're written down can they become part of a dialogue that unites people across different places. So that was the limitation of oral dialogue. It was kind of physically limited. It didn't last very long. And you couldn't analyse it, and you couldn't abstract the meanings and allow them to transcend their place and time sufficiently to build a global dialogue. So the internet has considerable advantages in some way, but also differences. It maintains many of the affordances of print. It allows things to be objectified as shared, malleable objects that we can all work on, shared texts, shared theories. But at the same time, it allows for participation and dialogue and the coexistence of multiple perspectives. So I think this idea of dialogic, which I've presented elsewhere, is a key to understanding the new kinds of thinking and the new kinds of education that are coming in with what I call the internet age, with the internet becoming the dominant means of communication, superseding print literacy, which in turn, to some extent, superseded oracy. Of course, we remain oral, we remain literate, but the internet is increasingly beginning to define how we understand ourselves and how we understand our thinking. A key illustration of this is the interesting contrast between Wikipedia and traditional print encyclopedias. Something like Encyclopedia Britannica was selling itself as the authority. You turn to it to find the truth. There are many competing interpretations. Go to the encyclopedia to find the true one. Wikipedia is explicitly something that's produced in a participatory way, and as many people point out, you can't really trust it. If you read an article in Wikipedia, it's very wise to check, just in case someone is trying to manipulate the truth. It's not about the truth, it's not about editorial control at the centre. And remember, print implies presses at the centre. Somebody has to control them, somebody controls the truth, somebody determines what's in the textbook. There is one version, there is one representation. With the internet, this no longer becomes possible. It becomes immediately obvious to anybody that there are always multiple versions, that there's no way out of the endless dialogue about everything, and that the best thing to do is to participate in that dialogue. And even in looking something up on Wikipedia, you are participating in knowledge construction, because you can't just accept it, you have to triangulate, you have to check with other sources, and you have to come to your own view. And preferably, if you're a full participant in this knowledge construction process, you would write your own pages, you would write your own comments. And so education becomes something rather different. It can't any longer be the transmission of fixed knowledge, this monologic vision, which is supported by the affordance of print for representing the truth. Now, with the internet, it has to become drawing people into the dynamic process of constructing knowledge through shared inquiry, through dialogues. So it's a return to dialogic, in other words, but it's a return, dare I say it in a Hegelian manner, at a higher level, because now these dialogues transcend to some extent the limits of space and time, which meant that one of the corollaries, I think, of original dialogic in oral societies, one of the corollaries was a kind of war of everyone against everyone. Most small-scale indigenous groups were at war with their neighbours, because the meanings and the morality were contained within the dialogue, and the dialogues were physically limited. But now we have an unbounded dialogue. The internet has no boundaries, has no limits, either in space and increasingly perhaps in time. So that's very interesting, and of course the question in that book, Dialogic Education for the Internet Age, is how do we need to rethink education and re-understand education in this new context. And of course dialogic is a key concept for that process of rethinking.